Hello and welcome to today's PINA Wisdom Story, where we get to listen in on the wisdom that can only be earned by professional permaculturists with 20 plus years of experience working within the permaculture framework. PINA Wisdom Stories gives us all a chance to hear from PINA diplomates, board members, and other pioneers from the early days of permaculture's development. We seek to make the connection between the elders in our field of study and permaculture enthusiasts everywhere on Earth. I'm Jesse, and I'll be hosting today's conversation, which should last about 90 minutes. Please leave any comments in the chat as you have them for today's guests, and I'll make sure to share them with them. I always say interaction makes every conversation better, so don't hesitate. If you have questions or thoughts, just jump on in. And today we are honored to be featuring Jesse Labbe-Watson. Welcome, Jesse.
Thanks for having me, Jesse.
My pleasure. I'm going to read your bio. You can correct anything at the end if I get it wrong. Jesse Labbe-Watson came to permaculture over the last decade by way of the movements for social and environmental justice. After a brief apprenticeship at Earth Haven Eco Village, North Carolina, Jesse formally studied permaculture with Charles and Julia Yelton at the New Forest Institute at Humastasia Gardens. I probably butchered that. He graduated from their advanced PDC in October 2008. He has gone on to start a permaculture landscape design and build and sustainability, if I could talk, sustainability consultation firm in the Mid-Coast area. He has consulted for private residents, market gardens, farmers, and nonprofit organizations. He is active in movements for sustainability, including permaculture, regenerative agriculture, agroforestry, and food sovereignty. He was a principal logistics coordinator for the 2010 and 2014 Northeast Regional Permaculture Convergence, hosted at the MOFGA Fairgrounds. He served as the president of the board of PAN, the Permaculture Association of the Northeast, from 2016 through 2019. Jesse also holds a site design diploma from the Permaculture Institute of North America. Jesse brings an artist's paintbrush, a philosopher's pedantry, a tracker's attention to detail, and a holy fool's comedic relief to the company he keeps. I love that sentence. He lives with his young family in Rockland. Thanks for joining us, Jesse. How you doing?
Thanks for having me. I usually don't do math in public, but that decade, I think it's longer than a decade at this point. I don't know.
Okay, yeah.
And I don't know how long ago 2008 was, but I think it's more than a decade at this point.
Yep, fair enough.
Baker's
And I wanted
dozen?
A baker's dozen for the record.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about a holy fool's comedic relief because I just love that line. What does that mean to you? And I think I might share that tactic or strategy or personality. But what does it mean?
Well, so but I like to laugh and I like to crack jokes. A student said that I keep it light, but I keep it real. And
Okay.
so I guess that's kind of the thing. It's like, the holy fool might laugh and poke fun at stuff, but holy fool can also switch into ceremonial space when necessary. And so even though I'm kind of a jokester or a joker, I'm a trickster like Raven, I guess, maybe in certain circumstances. But I like to crack jokes, but I like to keep it real too. So I guess that's why I said I was like leaning into an archetype or something, I think, when I wrote
Yes, that. Totally. That is an archetype. And for me, it manifests in the way that I'm willing to make a fool of myself and, like with my body, like physical comedy is a gold mine to me, but also very quick to like, now let's get very serious, not scary serious, but like, let's go to the real matters of the heart here and talk about things that really, really matter. But then I'll be right back to joking very quickly. So yeah. I appreciate that. And I love that you mentioned that. So where do you actually live? You're coming from Maine. Did you say Rockland?
Rockland, Maine. Yep. So it's okay. Called the Mid-Coast of Maine. So Maine's a big state. It's a small town, but it's a big state. And so there's like Southern Maine, there's Western Maine, Central Maine, Mid-Coast Maine, Down East Maine, and then Northern Maine. And so
okay.
I'm in the Mid-Coast, so I'm like hour and a half from Portland and about 4 hours from Boston.
Does the Mid-Coast have any special like qualities that like, oh, this is the Mid-Coast, like this is what we do, this is what we eat, that sort of thing?
Oh, you wouldn't like it here.
Why? Why is that?
There's a lot of bugs. It snows a lot. It's cold all the time. It's like 6 months of winter and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
is Mid Coast known for anything? I don't know. That's a good question. Let me think. Um, I guess Rockland fancies itself the art capital of Maine now. Maybe Portland
Ooh,
used to
okay.
be like Portland. Portland has like the highest density of restaurants or something per capita. Rockland is probably um, next in line for that kind of thing.
Mm.
There's a lot of artists that live here, I guess, so it's kind of groovy. It's hip.
Okay.
I
Yep.
mean, it's getting hipper all the time. I'm surprised, how hip it is. I'm not accustomed to being that hip, but Auckland is getting hip.
All
That's why I
right.
said you wouldn't like it here. It's a joke.
Yeah, I understand. I took it as you're trying to keep people from moving there in droves, you know. Um,
Yeah.
but so let's walk back. Well, how did you sort of like, I always like to ask where did you come from, but with an eye on like as a child or what sort of things like turned you more toward nature? Were you always like a nature kid? And then how did that lead to permaculture eventually? Like what's your permaculture origin story?
Okay. Um, to be fair and transparent, I'm a transplant. I was born in the Pacific Northwest in Washington State on the Olympic Peninsula. So I'm from a town called Aberdeen,
Oh,
Washington. It's if any of you have heard of a little band called Nirvana, it is the same town as Nirvana. Um, and it's not Aberdeen, Scotland. It's Aberdeen, Washington. That's where I grew up. In the 80s, so I was a latchkey kid outside a lot. I grew up hunting. I grew up in the forest, very active imagination, and I was aware of the presence and existence of the little people in the forest.
mm,
And then that forest got logged, and that was a terrible memory when that happened. That was one of my first major heartbreaks, was watching my childhood forest get cut. Um, and then I went
yep.
to college, the Evergreen State College. It was right up the road. It was the closest 4-year school to my folks' house. And I wound up at Evergreen because I wanted this job. Like, my dad worked in a pulp mill, and the pulp mill would hire the kids of mill workers during the summer. But at the time, I was under the impression you had to go to a 4-year school in order to get that job. So in order to get this summer job working at the mill, I wound up at Evergreen. And that was a fantastic luck for me, because that was where I learned how to think.
Mm,
Back in the 90s, Evergreen was pedagogically quite innovative. Nowadays they have a term for the kind of there's no set numbers of classes you're supposed to take. They have a name for that for colleges nowadays. You could design a lot of your own study and stuff like that, which I did. But I graduated high school. I was interested in art. I wanted to be a comic book artist when I finished high school. Um, I went to college, I fell in love with philosophy, and so I was a philosophy major, if you could call it that. I mean, you get a degree from Evergreen, and you get a degree in what Evergreen. That's kind of the joke there. And I mostly studied history and philosophy of science, philosophy of mind, philosophy of history, psychology. And I finished Evergreen, and nowadays they call it woke. So I got woke at Evergreen, and wanted to be an activist. I graduated in 99, and like a schmuck, I thought, okay, you graduate college, you move to the city, and you get a job in the city. So I moved to Seattle, hated it. I stayed in Seattle for 5 months, until the WTO came to town. So for those of you who don't know, WTO stands for the World Trade Organization. I could smell history coming, so I stuck around. I white knuckled it in Seattle until the WTO came through town at the end of November, and so I was there for the Battle of Seattle, and
Wow.
another radicalizing event. From from that, I got involved in anti-globalization activism. I mean, we were always a union family, and we'd been on strike, so I was no stranger to direct action.
Yep.
Which is, I wound up marching with a lot of the unions in Seattle at the time. I was kind of like back and forth between unions and like environmental groups and stuff. But after Seattle, I moved back to Olympia and got involved with, uh, let's call it radical direct action environmental groups. I met my wife in college, and eventually she transplanted me out to Maine. um, and I got involved with Earth First here in Maine for a bunch of years. And we got our asses kicked most of the time, as you do.
Oh,
In
thank you. Yeah.
if you're an environmentalist and you're trying to prevent destruction of wild places, the forces of globalization are kind of hard to go against. And so we lost a lot. At one point, Plum Creek, which was the largest private landowner at the time, this was in like oh 06, oh 07, something like that. Plum Creek wanted to um, develop this huge tract of land up around Moosehead Lake. Um, and we were an intervening party. We were called Native Forest Network, and we were involved with, like, we were basically kind of like a lawyer trying to pick apart uh, Plum Creek's proposals. Like, they said it was going to be eco groovy, and we tried to poke holes in their arguments, and I thought we did a great job. But the thing was rubber stamped; it was bought and sold before it ever started, and so I was pretty heartbroken. Funny thing, I actually learned about permaculture. The first time I saw the word permaculture was at a zine table at a conversion space in Seattle. So that
Oh,
was the first time I saw the word, and I looked at the zine. So this is back in the 90s. The internet was a new thing, and zines
right.
were still how alternative information kind of spread.
Yep.
And so that was the first place I heard of it. And then Earth First and all these heavy losses and stuff. And my wife suggested, yeah, maybe it's time for you to take that permaculture class. So
Mhm.
in '08, that was when the summer of '08, I took a class. Charles and Julia Yelton were the teachers, and Lisa Fernandez was the assistant. Um, and I was able to keep my radical analysis of the world, and still find a way to make positive change in the world. If I mean, after the WTO, uh in the radical space, there's a lot of anti civ theory, anti civilization. Like, think Unabomber, think John Zerzan. These were some authors that really, Derek Jensen. Okay, these are some of the founding philosophers, I guess, of that intellectual movement. And that's kind of a heavy ideology to carry around. And permaculture allowed me to kind of maintain that radical analysis of the structural oppression of the world, but at the same time, it's solution oriented, which is why we're all here, which is why we love the thing. It's focused on solutions and ways to kind of find ways to straddle both worlds, right? There's this, one age is coming to an end, I think. And some new world is trying to wake up and begging to be midwifed. And we're in this transition phase. And I think, as a set of thinking tools, permaculture really allows us to navigate that difficult transition between the old world and some kind of eco groovy future world where biology is kind of like the basis of the world rather than technology, let's say.
Yeah.
Um, so right. So I took the basic class with them, and then I they saw that they had a critical mass to run an advanced course. So I took the advanced course too. And then I
Was that
hung
sort of like one right after the other?
I did. I took them in succession. So it was basically
Okay.
summer of '08 was the basic PDC, and then fall of '08 into '09 was the advanced course. And so how the basic course is probably how most people learn about permaculture. It's a survey course of a bunch of eco-groovy gardening practices and philosophy and stuff like that. And then you do a design with a group for like a fake client or something. And so you work on it in a group setting, and that's cool. And then the advanced course, they coached us on designing for a live client that actually wanted our services.
Okay.
And then I hung my shingle and I started doing design work for friends and consulting and stuff like that. And, after 10 years, I've put something together and I make a portion of my living off of it.
Yeah. Yep. That's great. Excuse me. I resonate with a lot of that. For one, growing up similar era, I remember WTO as being sort of a big event. I think that was 1999, right? So I
Yep.
was in college, sophomore year of college, and that was a bit, I was reading Noam Chomsky and at the time, and Ralph Nader and that sort of thing. So very similar path in that way. And also felt that just like pure heartbreak of seeing a beautiful space that I grew up in be demolished before I had any concept of colonization. And then as I got older, the heartbreak of being like, there's no way to win. These forces are just tremendous. And like, there's probably more of us who want to see the world like, promote seventh generation activities, but I don't know how we win. They have like all the power centers pointed against us here. So then finding permaculture being like, oh, thank the Lord, because of the synthesis, like you were saying, like, okay, this still holds my radical sort of understanding of the world and what needs to change, but it offers me a path to live my life where I'm not just like feeling like disappointment after heartbreak, which that still happens anyway, because the world is still being, brutalized. But so thank you for sharing that. That's a really good great sort of arc that gets you into them becoming more professional with it. So let's like double click on that. What made you like, how would you advise someone having now put up like a design firm and been successful at it? How would you advise somebody getting out of the PDC or an advanced training to start, okay, I want to make permaculture my career? Maybe what would be some good steps toward competence so that you're not, having clients be disappointed in you, for you yourself to not feel like, oh man, I didn't ethically do the right thing by way of that client? How would you advise somebody to make it to that level of like, okay, this is part of how I make my income, or this is completely how I make my income?
Yeah. Well, my first piece of advice would be don't quit your day job. I never have quit my day job. I make my income. I have three streams. I do design work for clients. I teach a PDC, and then I work in the house construction trades. And I've never quit. I've never quit the construction business. I mean, I was always in the construction business. Um, so this gets into the holistic context a little bit. Yeah. How would I advise somebody to get into it? Take it slow. Take it really slow. People often graduate from, and this is, and myself included, by the way. You know, the world, a new path opens up before you, and you're super enthusiastic about the potential. Um, it's important to, I think, temper that newfound enthusiasm with dirt time. So, um, you know, get your hands dirty. The thing that I've always loved about permaculture is it's not just like a armchair theoretical kind of thing. There's a praxis to it. There's a theory and there's a practice. And you develop theory and then implement it in practice. And then the practice reinforms the theory. And so there's
Yeah.
this constant iterative thing going on. So I would recommend, if you don't know nothing about plants, learn about plants, learn about gardening, start building stuff, and make your mistakes. I mean, I've built a lot of really um, loose hugel mounds that wound up being rat hotels and yellow jacket hotels. So um, you take it small, small steps at a time. Begin by consulting for friends and family with very little risk, and make your mistake, be prepared to make your mistakes, and learn from them, right? So this is
Mm.
one of the things that I love about Hemingway's sort of like attitudinal principles of permaculture. Mistakes are opportunities for learning, um, and take your licks when they come, and make your apologies when necessary, and learn from your mistakes, and tighten up your process as best you can, and maintain, like, don't get all your information just from the permaculture literature. There's a lot of
Mm.
mythology, I think, involved in permaculture. Like, I'm a great fan of the cooperative extension. I took my permaculture course, and I was like, I'm actually new to gardening. So I took a master gardener course with cooperative extension, and learned a lot through cooperative extension. I'm a big fan of cooperative extension. Also, in Maine, we have a program called New Ventures, and it's a business class. You don't
Mm.
have to go back to college to get a degree in business to start a business. There's actually quite a lot of grassroots extension agency type classes that are free or cheap to teach you, to help get some coaching on how to write a business plan, how to do market research. Um, you know, is a design and landscaping thing something that your local area needs? I think be humble and don't pretend like you're going to make all your money. If you've got, I mean, depending on how much you need to make, like, I've got a family. I've got one daughter, and so I, if I was living, if I wanted to live on 15 grand a year, okay, sure, maybe that's all I could only do permaculture. But if you have mouths to feed, you might have to make more than that, and so that's why you don't want to quit your day job. So my holistic context, was always that I wanted to be near my daughter, especially for her young life, early childhood and stuff. I think, that is where I wanted to make most of my investments of time and attention, rather than work like a bastard, and not be around for her early childhood, and then try to pretend like I can make friends with her as a teenager. So,
Yeah.
living in rural Maine, I had to kind of take an analysis of the economic landscape and how am I going to make my living. I thought about being a school teacher. I thought I could always fall back on school teaching, and I did. Actually, that's like the only job I used my degree for, was getting into public school system as an ed tech.
Mm.
I got into the public school system and just saw, the structural problems with state-run schools, and so I decided that was not the path for me. And so I looked at other parts of the economy. Okay, is it fishing? Is it farming? Is it forestry? Is it construction? And
Mm.
seeing as how I have a degree in philosophy, that makes me, well trained to either go into food service or construction. So I went into construction, and that allowed me to get skilled, like genuine skills and genuine tools, and I could make a wage to raise a family on. And I had a degree of autonomy and control over my schedule, so that I could
Mm.
be around when it was important to be around for my daughter's young life. And so that was, that was the holistic context wasn't merely about how I make my living, but how I structure my family responsibilities as well.
Mm,
Um, so that's why I went into construction and never left. I wound up. It was hard at first because I didn't know what I was doing and made a lot of mistakes, and got my ass chewed out a bunch, and took my licks and made my apologies where I needed to, and made things right when I needed to, and came to fall in love with it. And now I work on a great crew with dear friends, and so I probably don't have to work in construction as much as I do now, but I've really grown to enjoy it. So I still do that. Um, and yeah. So for people who don't know what a holistic context is, that comes from the work of Alan Savory. And this is a really great complement to um, crafting a business for yourself.
yeah.
So I would encourage people to get clear on a holistic goal, um, which might include, you know, permaculture, strictly speaking, in a variety of ways, but it might include a bunch of other stuff too. It often does, and it's important to include that other stuff.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
so
I would
yeah,
second that
yeah,
with the holistic goal idea. And that's what one of the things you mentioned, Darren Doherty, earlier when we were chatting. But one of the things that the Regrarian platform really gives to us is that synthesis of permaculture and the keyline sort of system of design married to holistic design and other things. He's just sort of like, hey, I'm going to take the best of what's out there
yeah,
and make it into a functional system. But I think that's critical. When I got into permaculture, I got really excited about it and all the light bulbs going off and like, oh, I just want to do this. But I already had committed to college and a degree and just finished that degree. And it's like, that was part of my holistic context. I'm not going to just forgo that degree that I just got in a field that I still love and I'm interested in.
yeah,
I'm going to instead work at that job. But, and again, you were sort of mentioning this, like the permaculture seed that sort of sprouted in my brain was always have multiple streams of income just for resilience factors, right?
yeah,
Just like you want multiple sources of water and energy, etc.
right,
So that sounds like what you've sort of done. And that's also kind of how I've done it. And I'll just take this opportunity to plug the PINA diploma program, just as another way to get like sort of clear about what you're interested in terms of permaculture. We have 6 tracks in the PINA program, and there's probably more to come. But for instance, the first one is permaculture site design. So maybe you just want to design sites, and that's like your jam, and like, cool, that would be a really good place to focus and get some mentorship. And that's one of the things that the program offers is like a field advisor, so that when you have mistakes or when you do get stuck, you have somebody to like bounce ideas off of, maybe bring your morale up at times and encourage you. There's also permaculture education. If you want to be a teacher, there's site development and implementation, more of the sort of landscaping implementation. There's community development. There's media and communications, and there's regenerative land management. So that's another way to hone in that with the holistic goal and context would really help you understand, okay, this is, I don't want to just do permaculture. I really want to be expert and gain skills in X.
yeah,
So I'll just throw that out there.
yeah. I feel like David Holmgren was like, permaculture designers should be instead of like a jack of all trades and a master of one.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I like that, as opposed to a jack of all trades and a master of none,
That's right.
which is usually the saying. But David Holmgren, I think that reminds me of his advice is to get good at one thing, and Savory talks about it too, and Joel Salatin does. If you're a farmer, it's like get good at one thing, and then get good at one thing, let that one thing be your moneymaker, and then branch out from there.
Yep.
I guess I just wanted to say that also one of my mentors in Earth First, he was a carpenter. And the thing that inspired me about his life was that because he was a self-employed guy with tools and real skills, um, he could that was a way to basically fund his activism. Uh,
Yeah.
so he worked when he needed to make money, and then when something come up, a cause came up that he wanted to devote some time to, he could. He had that freedom and that control over his own schedule as a self-employed person. So whether it's in some kind of construction trade or something else, that's my familiarity, or if it's, a self-employed computer job, I think this was the model that Jimmy taught me was to have a day job and let that day job fund your activism. And that's often how I've thought of permaculture, which is, it's always been kind of how I think of permaculture. It's activism that sometimes pays the bills.
Yeah. That's interesting. I like that. Well, tell me a little bit about construction, because obviously a big facet of permaculture is like natural building and all those techniques and skills. Now, I imagine most of what you're doing is just more standard construction, but have the two worlds mixed together? Do you find yourself with opportunities to, do cob or round like timber frame or whatever, straw bale or hempcrete or any of those fun things?
Timber frame, yes, but the hempcrete, cob, straw, and stuff like that. This is one of the things that I learned at Earth Haven, actually, was that natural building is not a trade; it's an owner builder movement.
Okay.
So really, after Earth Haven, that was when I decided to go into the construction trade to learn how to build stuff in a conventional way, and then I could adapt those skills to like some kind of a hut or cabin, an eco groovy cabin with cob or slip chip or whatever. I do have permy friends down east that live in eco groovy hobbit houses like what you're talking about, that they've built themselves. And
Cool.
I don't know that natural building is, I mean, I knew people that were natural builders and did cob and straw bale and stuff like that, but you had to travel regionally to get those jobs. And I saw people who had to travel, to some other state for a job, and I was like,
Right.
man, I can't be traveling all over the region and many hours away, because I need to stay close to home, because my kid is young, and I wanted to, that was the primary thing. I wanted to make
Yep.
sure that I was around for the kid's childhood.
Yep.
And so that's why I didn't try to specialize in natural building or anything like that. I
That
just
makes sense.
pretty much
Yep.
work in conventional construction trades, and I specialize in noise and dust, and right now sheet goods and rolled goods, because everybody likes building with foam and tape and more foam and
Oh, noise and dust. That's fantastic. Yeah, and like that, something you were saying earlier about like dirt time too reminded me of something Dave Bainline said when I was lucky enough to interview him. But he was just really saying, like, just like you said with like the conservation, use those things that you have around you. And one of the things he was like, don't forget about trade schools, y'all, or community college, to learn how to build, to learn how to do electric, to learn how to plumb. I mean, you can really skill up quickly just by taking advantage of all these quote non-permaculture related resources that are just there for us. And then you can go use it however you want. You can build whatever you want with it once you get done with it and you have those skills. So I'll
yeah.
just throw that out there.
Yeah, I totally agree. Permaculture is a way of thinking. It's a way of seeing the world, and it's a way of thinking. It's not something you do. Somebody else said
Right.
that before me. It's not a thing you do. It's, for all I know, it was, yeah.
I learned that from Larry Santoyo because he was my teacher. He'd say, you don't do permaculture, you use permaculture in what you do.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And Andrew,
Millicent? Millicent? Or no?
no, in upstate in
Oh,
New York, huh?
Faust.
Andrew Faust, yeah, I heard him say that first. It's not something it's not a thing it's not something you do. It's a way of seeing the world. It's a way of seeing energy flows through systems, and it's a way of making interventions in those systems according to your will.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, let's transition, Jesse. There's a couple other things, like I'd like to get to decolonizing and the spirit piece, but let's do that after we do some visual. You said master, a jack of all trades, master of one. Well, it seems to me, just from talking to you earlier and looking at some of these images, that you seem to have really mastered maybe teaching, as well as the artistic side of like producing these designs that are really beautiful, like from your students, obviously, but you make them as well. So perhaps we could move into visuals and talk about like the process to get somebody to be really competent at producing really high quality maps and really high quality visuals, which
Okay.
is not typically taught in PDCs, at least the ones that I've taken.
Right. And this was a modification for that we made because of Corona. I inherited the PDC, Charles and Julia. They eventually moved out of Maine, and Lisa Fernandez, who was the assistant for that course, eventually took over the teaching of that class. And eventually, after I did my dirt time for a couple, 3-4 years, she recruited me to help teach with her. I
Mm,
was super scared at the time.
yeah.
um, but she recruited me, and I kind of learned a thing. Me and my wife, we were always pedagogy nerds. My wife, her undergrad degree was in education, and
Mm,
so we always had a critical mind and a critical eye toward how we teach stuff, how we distribute knowledge, how we produce knowledge, and how we go about teaching that. So I learned a lot from one of my other mentors, Lisa. And then we all took a course with Darren Doherty, a Regrarians training, um, which basically is the scales of permanence, which comes from Keyline. But like you said, he mixes in holistic context and everything like that. So in terms of services that I offer for the design business, so maybe we'll talk about a little bit about the design business, and then if we want to talk about the teaching aspect, we'll talk about that. So,
yeah,
um,
and right before you jump into that, is the design business Mid-Coast Permaculture, or would people go to a different website for the design business?
yeah, the design business is Mid Coast Permaculture. The
Okay,
teaching business is Maine Ecological Design School.
perfect. Thank you.
We call that MEADS, not meds,
Okay,
because
for
Maine
the
has an
record.
E at the end of it. Anyways. Um, so yeah, because I'm in Maine and it's a rural state, I needed to develop a variety of products, let's say, that are available to people of different um, different means. Okay,
Mm,
like I've worked for very wealthy clients, and I've worked for very average, low income clients as well. So over the years, I've had to develop different products that different people could access according to their means, and so I have basically a menu, an a la carte menu of what it is that people might want. Some people just want advice, so that's a consultation. So that's just a walk and talk kind of a thing. The design process begins with a questionnaire. I mean, I've over the years I've developed, most of my client management happens over email. And I'm not going to change to TikTok no matter what. I used to draw with pencils and ink, and I got dragged into the computer age, so I draw on a computer now, and I don't really like being on a computer, and I'm not going to do TikTok, so it's just going to have to be email. And they're going to have, and I make that clear. I actually make that clear. It's like, hey, people will text me stuff sometimes, like big long epic text threads, and I have to redirect them. Hey, if this is a substantive conversation, let's have a substantive conversation over email, because it's searchable and we can keep these threads organized. If
yeah,
it's, trying to, for something disposable, like, hey, what time and where, and these sorts of
right.
logistical things, text is fine for that. But for substantive discussion, I prefer email. Um, and then I begin with a 8-page questionnaire, which was developed and written by Lisa Fernandez,
Mm.
and she open sourced it, and I still use. I've made minor alterations, but I credit her with the authorship of that, and so should everyone else who uses that questionnaire, which is popular all over the continent. I happen to know. Um,
Oh, so we could search it and find it, no problem?
Probably. I've think that I've seen, I mean, other people develop their own questionnaires. I mean, Darren Doherty, Christ, he's got like a 20-page questionnaire or something he tries to get people to fill out, and like, forget about it, you know? I mean, it's like pulling teeth sometimes to get people to fill out an 8-page questionnaire. People like, they
I
blink.
was like, yeah,
Hmm?
no, I was thinking that. I was thinking that's pretty big. I mean, that's a lot. You're asking a lot of time, not a massive amount, but maybe an hour of concentrated time
Yeah.
filling out something that big.
Yeah.
But that's also, you need that information. You can't really do with much less, you know?
It weeds out the non-serious people.
Yep.
Um, or, you know, like some people are like, yeah, some people aren't serious,
Yeah.
and you need to fill out the questionnaire because unless you want to pay me to sit there and interview you with
Right.
that questionnaire, because I need to get to know you and your goals a little bit. Okay, the design process is, it's a process of discovery. This is what I say. It's, you know, I'm here and I'm reading the landscape and I'm reading the ecology. I'm helping clients get to know their site in ways that they don't that they're not familiar with.
Mm.
But I need to know them too. So the design emerges out of the union between the existing ecological conditions and the goals of the client. And the design is frequently a process of discovery as much as it is an imposition of will. It's frequently an imposition of will also, but the idea is that you're trying to play nicely with the ecosystem around you. This is why we try to do these eco groovy practices and whatever else, right? So the questionnaire is, you know, over the years, I've kind of hemmed and hawed about whether or not I'm going to include it, but I've, you know, become much more militant. Um, you know, and if people don't fill out the questionnaire, then, you know, they ghost me, and that's fine. Um,
Yeah.
so begins with a questionnaire, and then I digest the questionnaire into, you know, it's the questionnaire is 8 pages. I digest it into 1 page, and I like working off
Mm.
of a clipboard. So I've got 1 page with 3 columns, and it is elements, goals, and then notes. 3 columns.
Mm.
This is the 8-page questionnaire digested into 1 page. So people frequently, you ask them about goals, and they frequently talk about elements instead. And so,
Yeah.
but those are important to note. So I do keep a running tab of the elements that they've cited.
Yeah.
But then I'm also trying to read between the lines. You know, as I have some kind of standard goals: grow more food, less maintenance, manage water, stuff like that. These are common goals that recur over and over again. But then I'm also reading between the lines, trying to determine what are some of the goals underneath that as well, and you know, what kind of a diet are we in service to?
Yeah.
Oh, do you have a spiritual orientation to the landscape?
Hmm.
Okay, or not? If I'm designing, you know, if I'm designing for somebody with a plant-based diet, that's different than designing for someone who's a carnivore. Um, so plant-based people aren't really interested in livestock, for example. And if livestock are part of the equation, that increases the complexity of the design.
Hmm.
Um, so number of stakeholders also increases the complexity of the design. You know, farms are much more complicated than just a residential kind of project. Um, so it begins with a questionnaire. I digest that questionnaire down into one sheet so that I can work off a clipboard. So I'm walking around, and the questionnaire also allows us to hit the ground running. Okay, so I get
Yeah.
there. We don't have to, you know, we do some light small talk. Hi, how you doing? How's your day going? You do the slow startup, but then you get going. Okay,
Right.
because a lot of times, you know, a consultation, I'm trying to get out of there in 2 hours or less.
Yep.
And that's really all the you know, bandwidth most clients have anyways. You know, they
Mm.
ask how long is it going to last. I say, you know, a couple hours usually, and that's all they really want. So the consultation is just a walk and talk, but it begins with that questionnaire.
Mm.
And then beyond beyond the consultation, which is just a walk and talk, and that's a standard fee. I plan on 2 hours. It's a standard fee plus travel fee.
Yeah.
So in some number of miles from Rockland, I just have a certain upcharge for gas or whatever. So it's a standard number plus an upcharge for travel, depending on if I got to go across the state or not. And then from there, if they want any kind of a design product, and I've developed a few different kinds of design products. If there's anything beyond that, it starts with a base map. So the base map is one piece of work, and then there's other types of maps that unfold from the base map. So if people aren't familiar with what a base map is, I'll should I show you now? Okay.
Yeah, that's perfect, because I was even going to ask what is in and what is out of a base map for you.
Yeah.
Like, where do you stop the base map?
Okay. So just to check, is this where we're at?
Yep. It
Okay.
looks great.
Okay. So this is a base map. This is a base map that informs the planting plan. This is the base map that I take into the field. Okay. So what goes on a base map? A base map really wants to be very minimalist. This is kind of complicated. There's actually quite a lot of dots on here, and those indicate trees. But let me just tell you what goes into a base map. Property lines go on a base map. Permanent hardscaping like roads and rock walls go on the base map. If there's prominent like dirt roads, like we got a couple of dirt tracks here that I also included. Permanent bodies of water go on the base map. So we've got a pool here and a pond here, and there's an outlet. Structures obviously go on the base map, buildings. And then and then also some other standard things like a visual scale, or what they call a relative scale, which comes off of the Google Earth image, and a compass rose, and then of course logo and other details. And topographical lines are nice if you can get it. That's a nice to have. It's not a need to have. In this case, I did have topographical information available to me in these look like probably 10-foot intervals. So I did put that on. But again, if that's nice to have, not need to have. And so what all of these dots here represent is the center of existing trees. So for this particular client, it's a big open space. There's a lot of field and a lot of existing trees. And so the trees and other like permanent objects, those are there to help me orient myself in the landscape. So when I'm walking around by this pool, let's say, with my clipboard, I can tell by these dots that there's a couple of trees here and there. And if I'm going to design this space right here, it just helps to orient me in the landscape. So
Yeah.
a base map, you don't want a lot of information on it. And you don't want to, the aerial photo documents the existing tree cover. So you don't want existing tree cover on the base map. You just want the suggestion of existing trees merely in order to orient yourself in the landscape, so that when you're designing, you can more or less accurately plot things out on paper while you're walking around. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Okay. So you can see here's the aerial photo, and you can kind of see the dots, and there's the aerial photo removed. And this blank sheet is what I'll burn off. I'll print off 5 copies of this, and then I'll follow the scales of permanence in the field while I'm walking around designing with the client.
Right.
So from there, we go on to document. So this is existing conditions. I think there's a zone map also that I made for this client. And then there's planting plan. And
those are all separate products that they can then order at a separate cost.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Each of these is a separate thing. Some clients don't necessarily need documentation of existing ecological conditions. A lot of people just want a planting plan. Okay.
Right.
So it's like that's one price structure. So it's intake, base map, planting plan. That's it. But if they're new to the area, new to Maine, for example, they might, or if they're data nerds or something, they might really like to see all the other stuff. Actually, this line right here is it's a pipeline corridor for this
Oh,
particular client. But there's also a side road. So some clients are quite keen on having documenting existing plant communities and soils. So what we have here is existing trees. There's a sugar bush alley of sugar maple trees. There's also a bunch of existing apple trees, a pear tree, honey locust. We've got the NRCS soil classifications on here, which are back of the napkin grade accurate. They're frequently not all that accurate, but just in case people want the NRCS soil classifications, some do, some don't. And then I also try to document existing tree species and kind of place to the degree that I think the client is interested, and to the degree that those existing tree cover is potentially useful. As it turns out, if most most existing forests are already food forests, believe it or not.
yep.
You can eat pine. There's a lot that's edible about conifers. There's of course a lot that's edible about maple and oak. These are common northeastern trees. So a lot of times I'll document existing plant communities because those could be useful in alignment with the client's goals as well. So this is another type of, so this is more an analysis of wind and sun and landform. So when I say that the topographical lines are nice to have but not necessary, this technique is from Dave Jackie's book, Edible Forest Gardens. This is volume 2, the design chapter, where he and Eric visually show how they document landform, and it's an arrow that points downhill. Okay, so let's see if we can I zoom in? I can't zoom in, I guess. Okay, so you can, and so these big arrows indicate the gradual or the overall landform of slope downhill this way. But of course, the house is on a bit of a knoll, so there's some small slope away from the house in these directions. So again, the arrows are an alternative way for you to document landform. You don't need topo lines. And then from here, full sun. So the definition of full sun is 6 hours of sun during the summertime or more. So there's full sun and then there's too much sun, I guess. And so you want to document what is full sun, what's partial shade, where is it moist, where is it kind of dry, how does the wind behave across the site. We've got summer and winter sun angles. And then we've got all these other data sets too. This is for the data nerds. We've got, I think we've got frost days, and we've got ripening days, and the direction of wind and overall patterns of rainfall and stuff. And this happens to be visually represented somewhere on a website. I forget where. I've got it bookmarked. And the challenge with this, and in this case, I've for the ecological analysis, I've actually exported 2 different maps, because if I tried to put both of these together, it would be unreadable. It would be a dog's dinner. So I used to draw by hand. I was very enamored of, I was very romantic about the idea of drawing things by hand. And I was eventually dragged kicking and screaming into the computer age. And it really is helpful to really clearly communicate ideas. So again, I used to be very romantic about hand drawing. And eventually I yielded to market demand. Customers expect a digital product. It's easier to make revisions, and it's easier to export multiple maps to communicate ideas clearly to the client. At the end of the day, who cares about my romantic attachments to drawing by hand with colored pencil and ink? What matters more is getting clients familiar with their landscape, growing a portion of their diet for themselves, and planting more trees. To me, that is what's more important. And so I could yield the hand drawing in favor of a computer drawing. That said,
Yeah.
I use Illustrator, and so the thing about Illustrator is I can make my own library of symbols, and it can wind up looking kind of artistic and somewhat aesthetic, even though it's digital. At the time, in like the early teens, the digital drawing programs and apps that they have now, the landscape drawing programs, look awesome nowadays. Back then, they did not look awesome, and so I didn't care to use them.
Yeah.
They looked very sterile to my eye. And so I developed this. I had friends teach me how to use Illustrator, anyways, so that's what I use now for this. And so now the challenge is, okay, again, how do we communicate these ideas in a clear manner for the client? So I use a combination of labels on the map, like words right on the map, but then I also use a key. So some of the symbols are going to be labeled. So the trees, for example, I'm not going to label the trees because the trees are in the key over here. So this, based on the landscape, I wound up developing sort of a alley cropping kind of idea based on the existing trees that were already there. There was some
Mm.
lines that kind of emerged, and because this is like a multi-generational kind of family homestead kind of thing, and I wanted to make it easy for them to do maintenance. And so alleys, straight lines or even curvilinear lines, as long as they're parallel, is very helpful. So
Yeah.
this is the implementation plan. The yellow highlights represent the mowed alleys. So
Mm.
the mowed alleys show like preference for like a nice view, but then also kind of a vague plan on how you might use that mowing machine to do some of the understory maintenance in addition to the gardens and tree and shrub cropping systems and whatever. So
Right.
I guess what I tell people is that permaculture is a landscape design philosophy that allows us to intelligently arrange agroforestry production models in the landscape.
Mm.
So alley cropping, I lean on alley cropping quite a lot.
Mm.
So rows of trees and shrubs, wide spaces in between. Um, so alley cropping is a big thing. Windbreaks are a big thing. Forest gardening, of course, is also. So, but that's so yeah, and then so it's an a la carte kind of thing. Each map takes me a certain number of hours. The base map is about 4 hours. The planting plan is about 8 hours or so. The ecological analyses, those are about 5-6 hours or so. And again, like the other reason I can say this is because of time and motion studies over a decade of just like fumbling my way through stuff.
Yep.
Uh, once you kind of get your design process dialed in and tight, then you can predictably you can predictably give solid prices for clients. It's like,
Right.
because clients,
Exactly.
they want a fixed price and a digital product, and after a decade I'm able to do that.
Where would you say people? Oh, I'm hearing myself pop through. Where would you say people should price themselves if they're just kind of beginning, but they have taken a PDC and they definitely like understand the material well enough to produce a product such as what you've made, but they don't have the dirt time in that digital world, so it's going to take them longer, and they might not know. Oh, it's an 8-hour thing. Oh, shoot, that took me 12 hours. I totally messed up my quote. Where would you say people price to begin with until they get a real clear sense of like, this takes me this much hours, this takes me that much hours?
Yeah. Again, I would recommend beginning by working with like friends, family, neighbors,
Yep.
low risk people to help you learn how long it takes you to do stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and then this gets into the market research aspect of writing a business plan. So do some market research, see what other landscape designers in your area charge, and then start off at half of that, you know, and then start off at, figure or figure out what you can live on. But I think, be fair to the client that you're new and beginning and you might fumble. So that's why they get a cheap price, and I've had lots of clients who were in full recognition that I was new and that I might fumble. But I was cheap. And so they were stoked to get some cheap advice that may or may not be valuable to them.
Yep.
So and then I guess this was, based on my market research, people wanted a fixed price. They didn't want an open-ended, by the hour kind of estimate. They wanted a prefixed price. So, I think, at first it might just be guessing. At first you're guessing, and you give a price, and then you just stick to that price, and then it
Yep.
takes however long it takes, and you make your hourly rate or you don't. And even still, it's like I aim for like 75 an hour when I'm doing design. And if I make 65, I'm still happy. If I got to put an extra time to do a thing, or because different, some clients need more communication because they can't necessarily read a plan drawing, for example. um but if you use some of these, I mean, I guess they got 3D landscaping programs now, or that you can export both a plan and render a 3D drawing. I mean, that might be helpful, especially if you're doing design and construction. The 3D rendering, that's probably a lot more expensive.
Yeah.
um it depends on, it also depends, you have to figure out what your costs are. How much does your computer cost? How much does your
Yeah.
software cost? You have to build all your fixed costs into your hourly rate to make sure that you're fair to make sure you're covering your bases, and fair to yourself, and fair to your family. um
Yeah. Yep.
yeah.
Going back to like taking a business course or coming up with a decent business plan with somebody who actually can help you figure out how to amortize like a computer or other equipment and put
Mhm.
that into your budgeting. Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Yeah. And again, cooperative extension agencies in your area are probably a good place to start for some of these grassroots, small scale business
Yeah.
classes.
Yep. And then what about the implementation? Are your clients often going, "Great, thanks for the design. Will you plant all these trees?" And is that where you say I don't offer that service, or how do you go about suggesting your clients get like quality implementation?
Yeah, nowadays I refer that out. I have built a couple. I have built a handful of designs. I've built quite a few, and I don't like digging holes.
Yep.
So, and I don't like schlepping bulky materials in a wheelbarrow. And so that leaves me with a couple of options. I refer that out. I A lot of my clients are do-it-yourselfers.
Yeah.
To be fair, a lot of my clients are do-it-yourselfers, and those are actually my favorites, because if we think about the culture aspect of permaculture, what kind of client, the kind of client that is like, "Can you design my landscape and then build it for me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would like you to build it for me also." I mean, these are clients that have enough disposable income, they have enough disposable income. Not only can they work on their house, but they can hire out work on the landscape. So
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah.
So this is a different class of people, and I have found cultural tension there myself.
Mm.
Um,
Mhm.
so I like My favorites are the do-it-yourselfers, the people who want to grow food for themselves, who want to get to know the ecology around out their back door. They want to do the dirt time. Those are my people.
Yeah.
The people, but to be fair, I have some clients that need a little bit of help. I mean, cool. They want to grow some food, but they need a little bit of help too. I get that. And but nowadays, I've been in the business long enough, and I've run enough courses that I do have kind of a network of installers who are local enough.
Mm.
If I'm traveling across the state, I'm like, I'm tell them up front, hey, I'm hours and hours away from you. I'm not going to help you build this thing. You're going to have to. I'll give you a plan. There'll be enough details that you can use it as a construction document. You can hand it off to any local gardener or landscaper, and between your understanding of the plan and your ability to communicate that plan to the builder, you can probably make something work. You probably make something happen that's totally workable. If
Yeah.
they're local to my area, I have people locally that I can refer that installation work out to. um,
Yeah.
my favorite people, my favorite kind of clients are the people that really do want to do the dirt time themselves, that really do want to grow their own food for themselves, and process that, and harvest, process, store. It's a lot of work. Homesteading's a lot of work.
Yep.
And I make that very clear up front. Like, urban people who work on the computer all day long, they move to some rural state, and they have this bucolic romantic notion of what it means to homestead. And I try to, um I try I try to make it clear to them that homesteading is quite a lot of work, and growing food is a lot of work, and you got to
Mhm.
put in that work. You can't just kind of push a button and make trees grow faster.
Yeah.
um and again, part of this gets back to the business, of the business plan, which is who's your customer. Defining the services that you provide, and then define your ideal customer. And
Yeah.
it's very important to define that as part of the business plan, so that you know who you don't want to work for, because that those those are painful lessons. When you wind up working for people that's not a good fit, there's some painful lessons that can happen.
Yep. Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. And I think as I get older, I get a lot faster with recognizing my boundaries of just like, I do not want to be involved with this individual, and just saying it and not being rude at all, but being like, yeah, this isn't going to work out. And even try to, like, here's some references that you can reach out to. Maybe they'll be a better fit, but
Yep.
doesn't have to be a big thing, but it saves you a ton of headache and a ton of hassle. And you might get clients that are nitpicky and demanding, and you don't want to work with that.
No.
That's not who you're after for quality of life purposes.
Yeah. And
So
and I'm usually juggling a few clients at a time, and it's super annoying when you got the client that thinks they're your only client.
yeah,
And
exactly.
they want you to jump as soon as they say jump, and
Yeah.
stuff. And it's like, no, it's not
Nope,
how it
that's
works.
not why I got into all this. So let's, the other thing that, like, we should look at, because I've just, like, the quality of your students' designs, visual designs, is great. I was looking at it beforehand, so we got to show the audience, because it's just, and then you could talk us through, like, how you're getting such good quality work out of what you told me was, like, a lot of these folks don't have artistic experience. They're not like experienced designers or something, but um you give us, for those of us who teach PDCs or advanced trainings, how are you getting these type of quality designs? And yeah, let's just show some of these. I see that now popped up
Okay, you
here.
can see this? Okay, great.
Yep.
Um, so, uh, I want to give credit where credit is due. So one of my colleagues, whose name is Shayna Hostetter, she has been very helpful in really getting granular and clear about what makes a good landscape drawing.
Mm,
So it's the standard stuff like form, color, texture, but also line weights and labeling conventions. So I'll
mm,
talk about some of that now. But just as a reminder, this is what goes into a base map. There's not a lot of visual information on it. It's like roads and driveways, houses and permanent structures, property lines, permanent hardscapes like patios, rock walls, and stuff like that. A visual scale, or what's also called a relative scale, is important. I like a visual scale because that scales. Okay, so if I zoom in, on this visual scale and print that off, that's still accurate. Okay,
Right.
so I do like I like a visual scale over like 1 inch equals 10 feet or something. Visual
Mhm.
scales are important. Um, Compass rose is important. Permanent bodies of water, objects of note like the centers of trees and rock walls and boulders and stuff. And again, that is for orienting. I work on a clipboard. I print this off, like I said, 5, 6, 8 sheets of this and I'm walking around with this on a clipboard in the field so that I can do a rough draft in the field. And I'm not showing that right now. I guess that's a stage in the design process that I didn't wind up showing you, but there is I do still draw by hand. Okay.
Mm.
And so I will do a rough sketch by hand because there's actually something different about drawing by hand with your brains, I think. Um,
Yeah.
there is something mysterious and elegant and magical that happens by doing some of this work by hand, not exclusively on the computer. So well,
Yeah.
I make a base map and then I scale it down to 8.5 by 11, so it's on a sheet of paper, and then I'll do a pencil drawing on paper first, and then if that's maybe I'll send that back and forth to the client. If it's like vaguely close enough, then we'll move on to the computer drawings.
Okay.
Um, but for most people, drawing on paper by hand is most accessible. So with these permaculture classes, we're trying to make design understandable to a wide audience, and we're trying to make it democratically accessible to anybody who wants it. So we do coach people through how to make a base map using some freely available computer tools, mostly Google Earth Pro on a computer. And then once you get your base map looking like this, then we go back to paper. Um, some of our students already have a background. They're already digital natives and they have understanding of how to use this or that software. So this student, he already knew how to use Illustrator and he sunk about 100 hours into this drawing. So
Wow.
it's visually very striking.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's beautiful.
yeah, it's very beautiful, like totally psychedelic. It totally fits with the guy. Um, and so that's one example. So like people come through the course and we teach them the design process, but then they kind of can run with it. And this guy
Yeah.
really, really ran with it. And like I said, I think the drawing alone, I think was about 100 hours for him.
Yeah,
Uh,
and you're not gonna do that with a client necessarily, but you'll do it for your own homestead that you're, like, gonna live at for the rest of your life, you know?
Exactly. Exactly. And, I tell people, check it out. You get out of this what you put into it, which is a truism. You can say that of anything. So people who take the course, you're going to get out of it what you put into it. And, we walk you through the steps and we help you understand the design process and in a step-by-step fashion. And then you produce what you produce. Um, this guy's drawings are also really good looking. He used to be an architect, so again, the last guy he had experience in the computer. This guy has experience as a architect, so he has an architect's hand. Like these trees, totally
Yeah,
like it's drawn by an
they're beautiful,
architect.
but don't freak out people because we're gonna now get to
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
people who don't have those types of
Yeah.
skills, you
So
know?
I guess, I just put these are all randomly assorted. So, okay. So again, at distance, this is drawn by hand. At distance, this is quite readable to my eye.
Yeah,
And this student was quite new to art in general and new to landscape drawing in particular. And what I'll draw your attention to is the line weights. So this is a thing that Shayna really drove home for me was that the taller element needs a thicker line. So you can kind of see that these trees have a thicker line than like the garden beds over here.
Mm,
Um, the tall trees have a thicker line than the shrubs. The patio and stuff has a thinner line compared to the house.
right.
Um, use of color. So the use of color here indicates what is going to be new. So all the stuff that is not going to change that already exists is left uncolored. Okay.
Ah,
So all of this, all that's in color is the idea here is the new stuff is what this student is going to wind up building for themselves. Um, and the other thing that I'll point out is the labeling convention. So it's a combination. I leave this up to the students. Usually, it's like a combination of using words over the drawing. Like this student here, he did a lot of words right on top of the drawing. He doesn't have a
right.
he does I don't think there's a key with this one. It's just all labeled. Okay, and he made it work because he's a professional. Um, and in this one, it's sort of an alphanumeric notation. So you can see up here, whoops, there's some colors and different, letters and numbers and whatnot. There's some symbolism too, but it's kind of a mix in order to communicate the ideas clearly. Um, so ditto with this student, the colored bits are the new stuff. And so this student is a gardener landscaper, but she never had experience actually doing a drawing. And
Mm,
so this is her first drawing, and it came out looking great. The combination
really
of
good.
color, textures. There's both colors. There's texture here with the hardscaping and whatnot.
Yep.
Um, and line weights also the line weights of the house, the line weights of the tall trees, the thinner lines of the shrubs, and the thinner lines of the meadows and whatever else. And again, the combination, it's a very readable document. This is okay. There's a title up here, and then there's the planting palette and the different zones and technical elements to build and stuff like that. So
Yep.
the challenge is that these are information dense. Any permaculture design is information dense. The challenge is communicating that information legibly to the client. That can
Right.
that can often um, be a challenge. Where is my next arrow? Ugh, bother. Um,
I'll just interrupt to say Adrian left a comment just appreciating your generosity and sharing the design process. I agree. Thank you, Adrian, for sharing that. Great to see it sort of in context as you're talking about it.
okay, yeah, you bet. Um, this particular design, this student didn't she has nice handwriting, but she claimed that she has no art background at all, no landscape drawing background at all. And again, she just kind of, you know she followed she followed the exercises and everything and came up with a really really beautiful drawing. She told me this was her like first attempt at a landscape drawing. I was like, you must have done this before, this looks
You're
great.
lying.
Yeah, I know. I was like, you're lying. How dare you credit me with being able to teach you something. um
So
and
then is the process for the creating these like broken up the way you teach it over days? So, like, let's do this layer, let's do that layer, or is it all like one big chunk of like, okay, let's focus on design for 4 hours or something?
we have, because of corona, so corona was the big kind of aha moment for me. That was where it's like, okay, oh, corona, because I'm an in-person kind of guy. I much
Right.
prefer teaching in person because there's
Yeah.
so much about human communication that is nonverbal and really requires face to face heart to heart kind of talking. There's
Mhm.
probably don't need to tell anybody this, but there's a lot to human communication that is lost when it's mediated by a screen. So I never had any intention really of being a okay, did I oops, am I still sharing screen?
No, you lost it, or I lost it.
Okay. Well, I just want to say, I've never really fancied myself becoming like an online educator or something like that. Corona changed.
Right.
Corona
Yep.
made okay, we got to adapt to Zoom and everything, and that was kind of the aha moment where I realized that if we don't teach people how to make a base map, then we're not really graduating designers. So that was the first thing. And so we did wind up developing a series of videos to show how to make a base map using free and available um, programs and stuff online. So
Okay.
so again, we do teach people um, how to make a base map, and then we follow the scales of permanence from there. And
Okay.
as part of the PDC, it's a survey course of eco groovy techniques. We do field trips and all the other stuff too. We build some stuff. We visit case studies. So there's a lot. The idea is that you come out of the PDC with a drawing and a handful of physical skills that allow you to like measure this and lay out planting holes in space, and then dig holes and whatever, and do some of this construction yourself. So the grail that we seek is that you can come away with a design for your own place and be able to build it with some degree of confidence as well. And we're only a couple of years into that, and we're still learning our lessons and stuff, but the drawings are coming out looking really good.
Yeah,
Stu
which is some type of indication that you're doing something right in terms of the process that you've put together, right? Like, you're getting that feedback. It's like, these look really, really good, and then you're getting those skills also coming out of your PDC. So, hey, man, success, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. This student here, she's also a gardener landscaper, and this was her first landscape drawing. She was
Beautiful.
terrified. She was terrified of laying on the black ink. Okay, because she liked the look of it. She liked it how it looked with colored pencil, and she has her labeling, which is I thought was clever. She printed it out and cut it and then pasted it onto the piece of paper. She was
Hey, it's like
terrified.
a zine.
Totally, right? Um, so I got to zoom all the way out. So this is the effect of this drawing at distance. It's very,
Yep,
very readable. The
yep.
the the line, the thick using ink in combination with colored pencil makes the drawing pop. And so again, just in terms of landscape drawing conventions, these line weights are totally a thing, and they really make quite a lot of difference. Um, this student came from an art background. He is new. He's a plant geek, and he comes from a fine art background, but kind of new to gardening and stuff. But this drawing, I really, in terms of a landscape kind of conventional look to it. It's very beautiful.
Yeah,
Like we were talking about Daniel Halsey, he uses muted colors. I love the muted colors here. He also did some shading, but he's also got line weights and a hint, of an existing forest over here without
cool, yeah.
putting a lot of detail into it. But then alphanumeric labeling, so you don't have a lot of words over the art. The words are around the edges of the art.
Mm,
So you want the art to
mhm.
stand out, but you want to be able to read the information dense design behind it. And that's kind of like the labeling, that's kind of a balancing act. That's a bit of a challenge. So this was an older woman, and and she was not enthusiastic about the drawing, but I think it looks great. Again,
Ah, yeah,
it's perhaps a little more rough compared to some of the other ones, but the color is there, the texture is there, the line weights are there, the labeling is quite decent also. So
Yeah,
you know,
it does what it needs to do, and it does it effectively.
right, right. And again, these are like whoops. Uh-oh. Anyways, stop sharing.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. Oh, it's like,
Mm,
this is their first drawing, and
incredible.
yeah, and it's like, okay, this one is what it is, and it'll look, it'll look better. Your future ones, I give people permission, don't be so hard on yourself, just let it
Yeah.
be what it is, and the future ones will look better.
Yeah, totally. But man, it like sort of goes away toward the artistic side of things too, like allowing people this experience of being able to be like, I'm not an artist. You know how so many people say that, oh, I
Yeah,
can't draw anything or whatever.
yeah,
But then like you've given them a process by which you kind of can't fail and like it'll look like what it's supposed to look like and communicate what it's supposed to communicate. And you can only get better from there. I mean, that'll be your worst one probably. So
yep,
I love
yep.
that.
Yep, that's exactly it. And at this point, it's kind of like, gosh, I know you think you're not an artist, but if you can write your name, you can do these drawings.
Yeah,
So
and they look really impressive to untrained eye, anybody would see that, and A, be able to kinda read it, even if you don't know permaculture at all, you'd be like, I see what you're doing here." And then B, just being, like, sort of visually sort of impressed, I think
yeah,
all those are quite impressive, so good work, and thanks for sharing those with us, I appreciate
yeah,
that.
because I never wanted to lose sight of the art.
Right.
Again, permaculture was like, I wanted to be a comic book artist, philosopher, activist, Earth First, blah, 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 all this stuff in my life. I was like, oh my God, this is great. Permaculture allows me to bring all of these things together under, in one hat, under one hat. Um, and so I've always, even like I said, even as I moved into the computer side of drawing, I wanted to maintain like I wanted to be beautiful. I wanted it to be beautiful still. And again, this is why I've even though I haven't studied formally with Daniel Halsey, I've his drawings
Yeah.
have always been a tremendous inspiration to me because they're information dense, they're very complex, they're very technical, and they're still beautiful. And all of
Yep.
that needs to happen, I think.
Yep. That's a huge, sort of subtle undercurrent of permaculture is beauty, because you not only get beauty in the design work, but of course you get beauty in playing with nature because nature provides the beauty for you. And if you can lay things out well and intelligently, there's beauty in that. So I agree with you 100%, I think. And again, my teacher was Larry Santoyo. He always said, if it ain't beautiful, it ain't permaculture. He's like, tuck in your cardboard. I don't want to see any cardboard, man. Like, make it look good. And he really like hammered that home. And I think
Cool.
he's right. I think the half-assed hugelkultur beds can be for your property, but don't put them out there in the public. And I've done this, so I'm not trying to admonish anybody, but it's like that matters and that communicates like, what is this? A beauty communicates something like a draws you in. What is this? I want it. Whereas sloppy design and sloppy implementation sort of repels. Ew, this is gross.
Yeah, I mean, that said, I do try to craft the expectations of clients to a significant degree because any permaculture garden I ever been to looks pretty feral
Yeah, me
because
too.
we're dancing with wildness, aren't we?
Yep.
We're trying to take a light touch. We're working with the ecosystems and we're trying to have a light touch. And I mean, I guess you could do high maintenance, highly manicured kind of look and have some food production come out of that. But most of the permaculture activists that I know and most of the permaculture gardens that I've seen, they're if you could appreciate the beauty in a woodland or a meadow, then you can appreciate
Yes.
the beauty in a permaculture garden that looks a little bit feral. It's not unmanaged, and with the right kind of eye, you can see that there is a method to the madness. And of course, like
Right.
time of year matters. You visit in the spring, you can see the structure to the forest garden much better than in high summer when it's just a wall of green.
Yeah.
Um, but I do try to craft it. I mean, I tell people, look, if you want a manicured, fancy thing, I'm not your guy. I focus on food production and native plant habitat and stuff. And if you could appreciate the beauty of a woodland or a meadow when you're hiking in a park somewhere, then that's what I can do. But that's the aesthetic that I'm going for. And I think
Yeah.
that's I think that's actually quite common in a lot of permaculture gardens, and I think it's fair to like state that up front and be
Yep.
transparent about that. I feel like I read
Yep.
that in a book
Great.
too. It was one of them books. It was um, Daniel Halsey was one of the co-authors on it. Wiseman also was a co-author on it. Um,
I'm not
uh,
sure. I don't think I've read that one.
yeah, well, there was three authors to it. It was Halsey, Wiseman, and somebody else. And the title of the book escapes me at the moment, but it's like I forget the title. But there was like a sidebar, and somebody put words to this sentiment talking about the aesthetics of these kinds of gardens, and it was
Oh, Milton says Ruddock. Was he
Ruddock.
the other author? Ruddock.
Okay.
All right, Milton. Now Google us the name of the
Yeah,
book.
yeah, you read the title of that book? Yeah.
Yeah, he's
Um,
my buddy, so I can order him around. Oh, integrated forest gardening.
Integrated
Oh,
forest garden. That's
thank
it.
you, Daniel.
Yeah.
Daniel's in house with us. Cool,
Oh,
man.
he's here. Hey, hi, Daniel. I'm a big fan. Integrated forest gardening, right?
How did Daniel know the name of that book? Jeez.
I don't know. I wonder.
Oh, he wrote it. So, hey, 20 minutes or so, or do you got to get going? I didn't ask you ahead of time.
I'm having fun.
Good. Me too.
Yeah.
Okay, this ties in actually, because we're talking about the feralness, right? And this ties into the colonizing and decolonizing or uncolonizing that you are also energized by, and I think weave into your permaculture and your life ways and stuff. And that also weaves into spirit, even though that's more personal. I mean, because everybody has their own version of that. But let's go in that direction. Part of what we were just saying is the aesthetic of permaculture looks a little wild because it's a partnership with nature, and nature is wild. Nature gropes all over each other, right? Any little niche that's available, something's going to fill it. And we're doing that dance with nature. And so we're not pushing too hard to have it be perfectly manicured, etc. So it does often look wild and incomprehensible to the sort of Western mind or the colonized mind. How do you interpret decolonizing and uncolonizing? Like where do you go with that? Like what do we need to be considering, and what practices might we engage in to sort of work on that piece of ourselves and maybe even our communities?
Yeah. So that's a big question. It's a huge topic.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I think it can start. I think it can start by growing your own food. We're utterly alien. Most of us are utterly alienated from where our food comes from, and we don't know what it takes. How much work goes into growing food. So I think just in my own, just for my own, personally, I've kind of, as the landscape, when I first bought my place, it was a yard, and it had, it was like a dog yard or something, and it was lawn, and there was a lot of like cheesy conifers and whatever. And so I've made my modifications over the years, the terracing and all of this. Um, and heavy mulches and the landscape has taken on kind of a a more feral look. And I guess I've often wondered if the rewilding of the landscape has an effect on the rewilding of my own mind or something like that, because I'm tuning into the land right outside the back door, man. This is, and again, this comes back to like my ideal clients. Like I want to work with the people who want to get to know the soil out the back door, who want to get to
Firsthand.
know, huh?
Firsthand, like
Yeah,
personally.
yeah, firsthand. I don't the wealthy clients that want a gardener to build a beautiful landscape and then harvest the food for them and then make a salad for them. Culturally, getting into the culture aspect of permaculture, I fail to see how that is like a really good fit for a permaculture designer, or I could appreciate if somebody wants to make that into a business. That's the clientele you got to chase. I get that. That's not for me personally.
Right.
Because again, my interest is in this cultural aspect of how do we remember how to be good neighbors? How do we remember how do we remember to be good neighbors to the soil life,
Mm.
to the insect life, to the plant life out there? How do we remember how to be good neighbors to our human neighbors, our plant neighbors, tree neighbors? How do we remember how to be good neighbors to the First Nations that have been here the whole time? We need to remember, we're at a point in society where we need to grow up, and we need to remember how to be good earthlings. Okay. And I think the empire has done a pretty good job of eradicating that memory from our mind. But
Yeah.
but we're talking about bone memory here to some extent.
Yeah.
Um, there's skin, flesh, and bone memory, and we have the ancestral memory. I think this is what permaculture, like some of the practices, really, a lot of them are deeply intuitive, right? And there's something
Mhm.
deeply satisfying about growing food for your own self and knowing your water gets clean, and these sorts of things. Um, so there's an element here of reclaiming the like taking responsibility for our life on this planet. Mollison
Right.
said something to this effect.
Mhm.
It's about taking responsibility for what it means to be alive on this planet. And life feeds on life. We all got to eat life forms. And so it's important to get to know personally, firsthand, the lives of these organisms that we kill in order to eat, whether it's a
Mm.
carrot or a deer. We take life in order to sustain our lives. And um, getting to know getting to know these life forms is one aspect. And approaching the death and the murder of carrots or deer or whatever it is. It's important to approach that with humility and with gratitude as well.
Mm.
So these are certainly first steps, I think, down this long path of uncolonizing our minds. And it's man, the empire is deep. The empire is very
Yeah.
deep in our head, in my head. And it takes a lot of effort and vigilance to weed out a lot of these ideas of dominion, which is the soft form of domination, right? Um,
Hmm.
Having total control. One design principle that Mollison is fond of is relinquishing control. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, that's also a helpful step, because these guys, Mollison and Holmgren, they were hugely influenced and inspired by indigenous cultures in Australia, and then all the indigenous cultures that Mollison studied when he went on tour.
Yeah.
I haven't read Travels and Dreams, but I think that's kind of I think that documents his time traveling before he wrote the designer's manual. Um, and
Yeah,
so
I've read that. It's full of great stories, and, like, you get to hear about him being a whale hunter and a baker and a bushman, and yeah, it's sort of nonlinear. It's told in the Mollisonian way, but
sure.
it's a fascinating read. And that human nutrition book that he also produced similarly owes it a great debt to, indigenous lifeways and more of that uncolonized way before it's reached its roots into all of us, it seems.
Yeah.
But that also, yeah, I'll let you go, but if you can tie that also into spirit, because that's one of the forces of the empire, right? And what makes the Western mind different than the indigenous, one of the key pieces is, like, spirit is in everything in the indigenous mind. The rock is spirit, the computer has spirit,
Yeah.
the great spirit is within all, and therefore that's why we're being grateful, and that's why we're being understanding of what you're just talking about. It takes murder to sustain our lives in one way, shape, or form. And so, but that's completely absent from the materialist worldview of like, oh, we don't even know if there's spirit, let alone it's within everything. The mountain has spirit, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'll let you riff on that.
Well, in a lot of ways, I anymore I have pity for the atheists and the materialists. Like that's a very barren worldview to live in. I mean, to live in a dead cosmos. I've never felt like I lived in a dead cosmos. I've always felt like trees are alive, and have sentience. Okay,
Yeah.
and I think getting into to uncolonize our mind, part of that uncolonizing work triggers the memory that everything is alive, and everything has spirit, and everything communicates and has sentience even. I mean, people probably think it's crazy for me to say that I talk to trees, like I have reciprocal conversations with trees. And even our British ancestors have a technology for talking to landscape, and it's called dowsing or geomancy. and
Mm-hmm.
and it starts with talking to water, and you're literally talking to water to find its presence in the landscape. And so dowsing, whether it's with the L rods or a pendulum or some other tool,
Mm-hmm.
this is a technology that comes from the British Isles. As I understand it, the dowsing that we have today comes from the British Isles, and this is an ancient Aboriginal technology from the British Isles that can allow us to literally talk to landscapes, and you know for information, or to help make decisions even. So and there's all kinds, there's a host of other techniques and practices for learning how to talk to plants, and any herbalism class. I think a lot of herbalists are also fond of talking about the animacy of plants and the willfulness, and how plants will talk to you in dreams, and they can teach you songs and things. And it's important to take that at face value. This age that we live in is really weird in terms of human history, because this is the first age where the dominant religion, if you will, claims that there is no spirit. All
Mm-hmm.
other cultures throughout history know that there's spirit in everything, and know that the world is alive, animate, sentient, and willful. And I think a significant part of this of bringing this spirit work back into our work as designers of human culture, is remembering that animism, starting there. We don't have to get religious about animism, because animism is sort of a metaphysical position that kind of underlies all other religions. Daniel Quinn talked about this as animism being kind of like the root of all other spiritual understandings or teachings or something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I think, and again, it's a memory. It's not something we have to, like. I mean, people. It's easy to talk to mammals, and if anybody has ever had a horse or a horse, listen to me, a cat or a dog or a horse. I mean, these
Or
are. I mean, horses in particular, as I understand it, are especially like emotionally intelligent animals. But
right.
cats and dogs, people routinely talk to their cats and dogs, and the cats and dogs, they understand what you're saying. I mean, it's easy to see that other mammals have sentience, have emotional lives, and can communicate. You can have a reciprocal conversation. You talk to a dog. Do you want to go for walkies? What's that dog do? That dog flips out. He's like, hell yeah, I want to go for walkies.
How'd
So
you know?
how did you know I want to go for walkies? I always want to go for walkies. So like you can have a reciprocal conversation with a dog. That's easy enough. Why can't you have a reciprocal conversation with a tree, or with
Right.
mugwort, or something else? You know, um,
Yeah.
that happens too, but it takes a trained ear, and plants have very subtle voices. They're very humble people. They have very quiet voices, and you gotta listen closely in order to hear them. And like I said, sometimes they come in dreams too. I mean,
Yeah.
especially mugwort. I mean, mugwort is a dream herb. Mugwort was the first plant that initiated a conversation with me. Um,
Cool.
and it's a
For
dream.
dream.
It's for dreaming, yeah. So you
Yeah.
dry it, you harvest it in the fall when the flowers and leaves are very aromatic. Dry the leaf and flower and put it in like a pillow and sleep on it with your head, and just kind of the volatile the aroma of the plant gives you dreams. That's
Yeah.
one of the primary uses of it in the European tradition.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. And it's like I agree with you that taking steps toward this doesn't have to mean you become religious or fundamentalist. That would be farthest from what I would suggest. I think the Great Spirit idea or the animism idea is a great place to start, and it sort of also awakens within me a sort of excitement and a magic and like a respiriting of the realm, which I knew as a child, and we all
Yeah,
knew. I think most
yeah,
of us as children, it was just that's how it was. It was this aliveness permeated everything, and that gets beat out of you through whatever empire forces and stuff. But it's so nice to just play with it. You don't have to believe that you can communicate with the tree, to hold the possibility space within you and then to try it, and
yeah.
then to analyze your dreams or try the mugwort thing. Or Veda Austin's doing this really cool work with like communicating directly with water and then flash freezing it, and the water has messages in it, and it's like, yeah, maybe that's self-delusion or pareidolia or whatever, where we see patterns where they're not, etc. But don't let the materialist worldview steal away the magic that exists and that can exist, even if it's just part imagination and part quote unquote real.
Yeah, I mean, it's all imagination until it's not. I mean, you can be empirical about this and you can test it for your own self.
Yeah.
And I mean, letting go of atheism and materialism and stuff like that. I mean, this is what I think is critical for this for the next age, because if we treat the world as full of dead matter, then you're going to have this globalized economy that we have now, where it's utterly focused on domination and exploitation because it's just
Yep.
dead matter. Who cares,
Which is the
right?
heart of the colonized mind, right? That's
That
the
is
very essence
exactly.
of it.
That's the essence of it. That's right.
Yeah.
That we're separate, that we're alien, that we're better than, that we can dominate, and all of these things. The antidote to that way of thinking is to remember that everything is alive and that we have responsibility to be in relationship with all other life forms on this planet, to be good neighbors. We got to remember how to be in relationship and to be good neighbors. Um, I maintain that this is an ancestral memory, and that we can remember how to do this, um people are remembering these sorts of things all the time,
Yep.
in every, even during apocalypse there's the seed for the next world, and people can remember these important things, however it winds up coming to us, in
Yep.
dreams through voices of ancestors, however it winds up coming back. Like these ways of thinking are available to us, and it's a much more magical world to live in. Like you were saying, it's a world that's alive and sentient and reciprocal, is
Yeah.
a is just a funner world to live in. It's a richer world to live in than one that's just full, where there is no purpose or place and everything's an accident and it's all just dead matter. I pity people that live in that bleak worldview.
Yeah.
um I've never been very partial to it. I've never been very good at it. I've always been kind of a default animist, and I
Mm.
think that it's time to just like come out of the closet about that.
Yeah. Well, thanks for doing that, because I think permaculture is a great pathway to bring people into biophilia, as Adrian was saying.
Yeah,
And that's a great step toward this more enriched spiritual worldview that we're espousing upon here.
yeah,
But we don't necessarily do anybody any favors if we don't talk about our beliefs vis-a-vis animism or spiritual connections within nature, because we might be depriving somebody an open door that they might be like, oh, hey, I heard Jesse say that. Like, I'll consider that now. So I think it's great to talk about it and come out of the closet. And I know that maybe people will judge it and maybe not agree with it, and that's perfectly fine, right? We have sentience, we have the ability to choose for ourselves, and that's another magical aspect of the living, that we're involved in. So thank you.
Totally. Hey, man, different strokes for different folks. Whatever floats your boat or loads your rifle.
That's right. Beautiful, man. Well, that's a great note to end on, Jesse. Thanks so much for your time and your experience and this great download. This is fantastic. I really enjoyed myself.
Hey, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me, Jesse. Thank you to PINA. Thanks for everybody that showed up. And see, this time was good. Next time will be better.
Well, yeah, and you're always invited back. And I mentioned to you before, but even we can do panel discussions about a like a pet topic. Like, oh, I really want to talk about this with some other permaculturist. Or if you want to invite folks in that in your neck of the woods, that'd be fantastic. We're always open to it. So beautiful. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for being here and your engagement in the chat. I appreciate it. Makes it come alive a little bit even more. So thanks for witnessing this conversation, and we'll hope to see you out there in the real world someday.
Yeah, right on. Right on. Thank you.
All right, Jesse. Take
Bye.
care.
You too.
Shit. Sorry about that, folks.